Hi AP, welcome back. I am so excited to keep working on this project. This is another video with my hair drying in this weird way, so I'm going to keep messing with it while we talk. I'm sorry, it's bothering me, but y'all will do great. If you have not done the previous activity, 2.3.1, where we made a brush class and we made a new brush object saved to a variable that draws on the screen, please make sure and go back and do that now. What I'm going to recommend for this video is that you take that code and you go to File Duplicate so that you don't mess up anything you had and you can kind of see the progress in a different version. What we are going to do today is we are going to make a second class in one program, and this second class is going to create buttons for us that will eventually be clickable. What I would like to do in this program is make 3 clickable buttons in the primary colors from additive mixing, so red, green, and blue, and make it so that when I click on each one, it changes the color of my brush to the color of that button. So the very first thing I'm going to do is make this new class, and I am going to do that down, down, down at the bottom of my page beneath my brush class. So in my particular code right now, the brush class starts on line 21 and it ends on line 34. So I'm going to hop down so I'm underneath line 34, I'm outside all curly braces, and I'm going to make something called class button, and I'm going to start getting this set up. Now my buttons are going to need to be much more variable at the beginning, like when I first make that object instance, than my brush was, because I'm going to make many of them and I want them all to be quite a bit different. So I'm going to make my constructor, and I'm just going to think first about the things that are going to change about my button. So I would like to be able to place these buttons anywhere on the screen, and that means they're going to need their own X position and Y position. And I am specifically right now thinking about buttons that will change color. So I'm going to want a button color option as well. And I'm actually going to call this BC because I'm going to write this not a whole ton. But I'm going to have these 3 values, which means that in my constructor, I need to say something like this.x equals X position, this.y equals Y position, and this.button color equals BC. Now, there might also be other things about my buttons. For example, I would like them to have a very uniform size. So I'm going to go ahead and declare that in the constructor. I'm not going to let myself pick when I make new buttons. I'm just going to say their size is always 50, just so that my life is very consistent. Again, we are just making color buttons for today. In the future, if you were to decide to add on to this project, you might decide to make buttons that change what type of shape you're drawing with or the thickness of the line. And so you might decide to have things like a label or a design, or maybe your buttons are not all rectangles and so you have different choices there. That's up to you. I strongly encourage you in these make object, make things better assignments that you try after we are done to improve upon them. But this is what I think will work for us right now in this very simplistic example. So before I get into the methods for these buttons, I just want to make variables that can hold these buttons. So at the very top of my page, I'm going to make 3 variables. And if you have never seen this before, you are allowed to declare multiple variables on a single line. You just separate them by a comma. So I'm going to say let, and I'm going to say red button, green button, blue button. It's also just let it be known, taking everything in me, to not call it red butt, green butt, blue butt, but I do not want your parents walking in behind this lesson saying, why is your teacher talking about different colored butts? Sounds weird. So we're going to go into setup, and we're going to make each of these buttons into a button object. So I'm going to say that red button needs to be a new button. And unlike brush, I am not allowed to leave it like this with nothing inside it. I want to give it some default starting values. So for the X and the Y, I'm going to say the X is 0, meaning it's going to be like flush with this left edge of my canvas. And my Y is 50, so it's going to be like about right here. Then my color is going to be just simple red. If you guys want to adjust the colors to your liking, you can, but just simple red. Green button is going to be a new button. Again, X is 0, Y is going to be like right underneath the red. So since I know that my size is going to be 50, I'm going to call this 100. I'm just adding 50 to put it right underneath. And then my color will be green, so 0 to 55, 0. And then same thing for my blue button, new button. Again, I'm adding 50 to my Y position, so I just go doot, doot, doot down the page. It's going to be 150. and my color will be blue, which is 00255. Now, if I hit play, I'm not going to get any errors, which is awesome because it means that these did make correctly. But it also means that I need some methods because nothing's showing up, and ideally I need to see the buttons to know if I can click on them or not. So we're going to go ahead and make like a display method. You could call it display, you could call it show button. The goal of this method is just to show my rectangular buttons somewhere on the screen. I am going to call it show button because I think that makes sense. Show button does not need to take anything in because all of the stuff about how my button shows up is already like saved up here. It just needs to draw my button correctly. So I am going to put in that there should be no stroke. I don't want a line around the outside. That's just a personal preference. It has nothing to do with making this run correctly. The fill should be this dot button color. And then the button itself should show up as a rectangle where the coordinates are this dot x, this dot y, and both the width and the height are going to be this dot size. So it's actually a square since the width and the height are the same. Now if I hit play, still nothing happens, and you may be saying to yourself, that is because you have not used this method, and you'd be 100% correct. Up here in my draw function, I need to use this method. So I'm going to say red button dot show button, green button dot show button, and blue button dot show button. And now when I hit play, I should have these three buttons on the side of my page, but you'll notice I still can't click them, like nothing can happen here. So I want to make these buttons clickable, but I also want to make these buttons change my draw object, and this is going to be our first chance at trying to pass big chunks of data back and forth between methods. So I'm going to head back down into my button class, and right underneath show button, still inside my button class, still inside this last curly brace, I'm going to make a function called color clicked. And this is going to decide two things. It's going to decide if my button was clicked, and it's going to decide if the mouse is on top of my button and if the button was pressed. Now, I know that previously we've worked with function mouse pressed. You could absolutely use that with what we are doing now. Your code would just look a little different. I am just making this choice to keep us a little bit more organized and to let us see something a little different. But just know there are always lots of ways to get to the same solution in programming. And if you would like to explore some of those other methods, please come see me in office hours. Like, we can absolutely walk through it, and there's maybe even a world where if I have time, I'll record a second video explaining how that could look different. So in color clicked, I know that I need to have a conditional, and I know that I'm going to need to use the Collide 2D library, which is linked in this program, or hopefully should be linked in this program. So in my conditional statement, I am going to say that if collide point rect, which, guys, this is not coming from nowhere. You know there's a Collide 2D reference sheet. I happen to know it maybe a little bit better than you. If this is something you want to interact with, it's linked in your weekly work. Go take a peek at it and you can get all of the notation. I know that collide point rect needs coordinates for a point, the point in this case being my mouse, and then it needs to know information about the rectangle, so the x, the y, and what size it is. So because my point is always mouse x, mouse y, I'm going to plug that in. And then the information for my rectangle is going to be specific to each button, so I'm going to say this dot x, this dot y, this dot size, and this dot size. Now, in addition to collide point rect, inside that conditional, after collide point rect ends, before my Boolean, like, parentheses end, I also need to know that my mouse was pressed, so I'm going to use the variable mouse is pressed, which just returns true or false based on if I'm clicking on the canvas. Now, all of this is fine and good, but some of you may be asking, how do I get my brush to change color? And I'm really glad you're asking because there's a few different ways you could do that. You could do this with a return statement and like saving back to a variable and updating that way. And if that's something that interests you, again, come to office hours, we can talk about it. That's very familiar to what we've been doing before. But another way is to pass our whole brush object into color clicked and then update the color directly to our object. So I could say that the color clicked always needs to take in a brush object. I'm going to call it brush obj. And then in here, I'm going to say brush object dot brush color, because inside my brush class, that's what I called that property. is now going to be equal to this dot button color. So it's taking in my entire brush, all the properties, all the constructors, everything. It's going to look at that one piece, that one property of the whole object, and it's going to update the value for me. Now let's go up and test this with just the red button. If I go down and say red button dot color clicked, and I hit play, I can move around the screen, I can click. Oops, why is it mad at me? Oh, because I didn't pass something through. It's expecting to get an object, so let's give it the brush. And now let's hit play again. I move, I move, I move, I go, I click. Now I have a red line. And if I also did green button dot show button the brush, and I hit play, I can move all around the screen. I can now click the green button, and it should give me green. I'm not sure why it's not giving me green, but it's giving me red. Something, oh, because I put show button, it should say color click. Thanks, guys. I can now hit play all around the screen, click, and I can now change to green. Now, I could also update blue, but one thing I want to point out is this is a lot of repetition. I am repeating myself a lot, so I'm going to comment this out, and then I'm going to try and do something a little funky. I'm going to make a list called color array, and I'm going to stick all my color buttons in that list. So I'm going to say color array equals, oops, red button, green button, blue button. Okay? So color array, actually, why don't we call this color buttons? Sorry guys, I'm updating this to color buttons. So all my color buttons are now stored in one place. Now, the reason why I'm doing this is because whenever I see repetition, I should be looking for a way to make my life easier. And I think I could make my life easier with a for loop. So I'm going to make a for loop that starts counting at I, or starts counting at 0. I'm sorry. I'm going to use I as my variable. So it's going to say I equals 0. It's going to run as long as I is less than or equal to the length of this list. Sorry, I think it actually needs to be less than. So color buttons dot length, and then it is going to increase by 1 every time. So now inside of here, rather than saying red button, green button, blue button, I'm going to say color buttons I, because the first time this runs, it's going to be the red button, the second time it'll be the green button, the third time it'll be the blue button, and I want two things to happen. I want it to show button, and I also want it to use the color clicked function on the brush. And now when I hit play, I should get all my buttons. Even though they're commented out here, it's running up here. When I hit play, it draws red, green, and blue in about 4 lines of code. Now the reason why we're showing this kind of rushed at the end is because some of the requirements for your create task are to use iteration, methods, and a list. And we just did all of that in one single program. So again, this for loop, it's starting at 0. So the first time this runs, it's getting the first object from our list, which is the index value 0, red button. It is showing the button, and it is making it clickable. The second time it runs, it's getting the green button, it's showing it, it's making it clickable. And the last time it's getting the blue button, and it is showing it, and it is making it clickable. We're going to see even more ways that for loops can help us in the future, but for now I just want you to know that this for loop took all of this code, minus like the color clicked for the blue button that I didn't even bother putting in, and it condensed it to this code. It's okay if you're feeling a little overwhelmed with this. We're going to get more practice. This is all I have for you today, although if you would like to stretch for an exceeding and try and improve upon this program, you are welcome to try it, and please come to office hours for any extra help. Thanks, guys.